This is Focus with Jack Cottle.
Good evening, I'm Jack Cottle. Welcome to this month's edition of Focus. We are talking about LGBT issues here in South Dakota and around the Black Hills. Three guests with us today. Curtis Price, he is on the board of directors of the group Equality South Dakota. Nancy Rosenbraun, she is a board member of the Black Hills Center for Equality. She is half of one of the couples pushing the legal challenge to South Dakota's same-sex marriage ban. And David Stren, he is also on the board of directors of the Black Hills Center for Equality. And David identifies himself as asexual. Now, we talk about LGBT. We're talking about lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender issues here in South Dakota. It's an area where the law is changing quickly these days. A federal judge recently struck down South Dakota's gay marriage ban, although that is still on hold pending an appeal. And the U.S. Supreme Court says it is going to take up some cases on gay marriage coming up in their term in April. We're going to start with you, Curtis, as you see some of these changes around the country. What goes through your mind as you watch some of these go by?
Well, it's kind of exciting to see our society open up and people accept people that are different from themselves. And that's happening through social media, through, from people just meeting people. I mean, there's this great adage that every person that comes out brings 4 or 5 with them. And that process has been going on for many years now. We had the the marriage amendment in South Dakota to our Constitution was passed by a very narrow margin. I think the libertarian part of our politics in South Dakota worked in our favor there, but it was very, very close. And Equality South Dakota actually was formed in response to that. And I believe that if that vote were held today, there's no way it would pass.
Nancy, as you watch these changes around the country, what do you think of? You've been in this fight a long time.
Yeah, I started in probably in 1977. I didn't ever think we would see marriage in my lifetime. I really did not. But I also didn't think we'd ever see a gay person on TV back in the 70s. So all of these things have happened within a short window. So it's encouraging, okay? But we're also very aware that as we push the envelope, there's always a kind of a natural backlash. And we're beginning to see some of that surface. So marriage isn't the end, and it can't be the end. We need full equality. We need to protect ourselves with our jobs and our housing. There are too many things that can still happen to people. So consequently, we still have a large population in South Dakota that's hidden. Even to us, that's hidden. And we want to make that different for them. We want the freedom.
Now, David, you're the young guy in the group, just 21 years old. What do you see as those changes in that short period that you've been around?
Even for me, it feels like it's been leaps and bounds. When I started high school, gay people were still pretty much just hidden in the picture. They were kind of just the joke people. They were the ones that were made fun of. But now we're getting a more public face, it seems like, and we're getting much more acceptance, it seems like, and we're not taking things laying down like we used to.
Now, you talk about when you were in high school that it was mostly a hidden community. How difficult was that for a young man coming into high school, and you said you came out when you were in high school?
Right, when I was in high school, I came out and I thought I was gay. For me, I feel like my situation wasn't typical, I don't feel like. I know of a couple of different guys in high school who had a much harder time than me. I was relatively popular, so it didn't have any negative backlash on me, but there were some who I know would kind of forego going to school. They would skip school because they were terrified that something was going to happen to them.
Have you seen that change even from the period where you entered high school to now?
Yes, I feel like I have, with LGBT groups forming in the community and in the schools. There's a much better acceptance of these people who are different, so there's not such a need to hide.
Now, Nancy, you're talking about you were in this fight since the 70s. At that point, what was it like coming out and becoming public with this?
We didn't really become public. We gathered together to create our own sense of support back in the 70s. We did things, of course, there was no cell phones or internet, so everything was done by newsletters from group to group. We did hold 2 conferences at the Civic Center in those days, and we asked that we not have it publicized on the marquee. And the manager at that time agreed to it, and we drove up that night, and there it was on the marquee. So we held our breath going in, but when we completed the weekend, nothing happened. And so it gave us a little bit of assurance that we could navigate some. I also ended up having to go to court in '75 for my children. And it ended up happening in Wisconsin, in Milwaukee. And I figured a bigger city. There were others that went before me. And I found out at the end of that I was the first one. And I thought for sure I lost my kids. You can't be the first one pushing the envelope and win. I waited 10 excruciating days, and I got my kids. So that gave me, how you could hurt me as a mother was to take my kids. When I didn't lose my kids, it gave me a confidence that there's a lot we can do, that we limit ourselves by our fear, okay? And we have to push that as far as we can. And that's individual for each person, okay? They have to determine how far they can go. But for me, it gave me an assurance that you can try it, okay? That if I'm not going to lose my kids, I'm fine. You know?
Now, Curtis, you are straight. What brought you into this fight? What made you join in this fight for change?
People that I've known in my life that faced discrimination, that faced what LGBT people have to deal with. And I got involved strongly in South Dakota in the aftermath of the Amendment C, the marriage amendment, quasi-marital relationship amendment, whatever you want to call it, in '06. Right after that, Equality South Dakota was formed to work politically, both through lobbying legislators directly and also participating in campaigns. We have a political action committee that gets directly involved with candidates, and we also have a educational wing that's a nonprofit like the center here, and like the centers here in Rapid City. So it got me involved really in response to what happened there, and it gave me a feeling for what's possible in this state, that things can be made a lot more open and a lot better for everyone in South Dakota. Anytime we leave anyone out in South Dakota, we're less.
Now, Nancy, talking about the way things are here in South Dakota, how accepting is the community in South Dakota of the LGBT community? Here in the Black Hills, how accepting are they?
We've not experienced it. We know that there are those out there that don't agree with us. We know that. There's kind of a live and let live in Rapid City. We have held rallies last year, 2 of them at Main Street Square. We weren't protested, but it is done by the pen. Comments are left on Facebook, comments are left on journal articles. We've received some mail that hasn't been supported. Direct confrontation, fortunately, hasn't happened. But we've also had community members who've been assaulted on the streets. So it's still a landmine. It's still not free and open, okay? And again, as we push for full equality, we recognize that we have to be ready for a backlash, okay? And we can see that happening in other states with the religious freedom acts that are being put up in the legislators, in the legislatures. That's part of the backlash, okay? So we know that we're just beginning our work, okay? We have a ways to go yet.
David, as you see it, how accepting is a community here in the Black Hills?
I feel like there's most people are relatively accepting. There's, like she said, a live and let live situation around here. But there is a community of people who are very adamantly against gay people. And like she said, they hide behind the pen on Facebook. But you'll periodically start a conversation and you'll find these people out in the real world. And no matter what you say, to try and convince them that, we're just people like everybody else, they're not convinced.
All right, we'll continue our look at this issue when we come back with this month's edition of Focus. And good evening, I'm Jack Cottle. Welcome back to this month's edition of Focus, talking about LGBT issues, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender issues here in the Black Hills. Nancy Rosenbraun, she is half of one of the couples that is fighting the gay marriage ban in federal court here in South Dakota. Nancy, we were talking a little bit ago. Sometimes on Facebook, where civility sometimes will go to the wayside. You have to deal with some of the comments people put out there. But you also said now you have more allies, more people that are not part of your group but are standing up, supporting you. Are you seeing more of that now?
Actually, they are part of our group. And that's what I got involved in the center probably about 2 years ago. And that was the biggest revelation for me, was the number of allies that started attending our events. We put on 4 big dances a year, and half of the attendance is ally people. And that is so encouraging, because those hearts and minds have changed compared to back in the 70s when we didn't see that. We had maybe 1 or 2. Now we get so many more support. And so that helps. That helps a lot.
Do you see the same thing, David? You mentioned that sometimes you meet the people that put those Facebook comments, you meet them out in the real world. Do you also have a lot of people now that step up and say, hey, I'm with you, you know?
Absolutely. There's people who will kind of whisper off to the side, we support you, we're there for you. But then you'll have the people who are absolutely perfectly open, and they say, hey, I want that rainbow ribbon for the back of my car because I support you, and we want everybody to know it.
Do you see that support growing as well, Curtis?
Well, yeah, it's changed a lot, and I think one thing that's a little frustrating in this part of the world is there are quite a few people that have no problem with it, but as there are no workplace protections, there are no housing protections or anything like that, a lot of the community, one reason the allies feel so strongly and are as involved as we are is because we know that there are many people that cannot come to a meeting. We're having a meeting of Equality South Dakota tomorrow in Pierre, and we have a concern, and this was a concern at the summit last weekend, that people come out and they're worried about being photographed because they may have a landlord that has a problem, and there's no protection for them under the law, really. And so sometimes these people are living in fear and they can't come out.
Now, how does that work? Now, my understanding in South Dakota, I cannot fire someone because they're a woman, because they're black, white, because they're Catholic, they're Jewish, but you can fire someone, evict someone because they're gay. That is not a protected class in South Dakota?
That's true. I'm not a lawyer, but that's true. And there's a lot of pushback against that kind of thing, that the term special rights and things like that get bandied about. And what's really important is that everyone's treated the same.
Do you see need? I mean, do you see a need for that? Do you see issues or instances where people are subjected to discrimination because of that?
We have not had people report that they've lost a job or lost their housing. They haven't gone there yet because they don't want to go through that. We don't live in a large city where there are multiple jobs of the same type. You know, their housing is short in Rapid City. So I think that, especially here, there's not a lot of movable room, so they're very protective of themselves. You get out into the center of the state where the cities are smaller and everybody knows everybody, then it's even harder on those people yet. Our suicide rate is still high. The other rate that concerns us is the homeless LGBT plus community. We are 1 in 10. We are 10% of the population. I don't think that number has changed that much over the years. But 40% of the homeless teenagers are LGBT plus that have felt the need they had to leave or been asked to leave their homes because the parents are not accepting.
Now, you mentioned the term LGBT plus. What is the plus?
The plus is, it's interesting for me, okay, back in the day, what's just LGBT? Okay, now I'm having to relearn. We have David, who is asexual. There's pansexual. There are a lot of our sexuality is actually a spectrum. It is not either or. There are a lot of places that we can land on that spectrum. And so we recognize that we need to open up and be accepting and be acknowledging of all those different spectrums. Because if we want equality, we need to extend it. Okay, so the LGBT community across the country is starting to open that up. One of the biggest growing segments is the transsexual community, which is way different than back in the 70s. We didn't hear anything about that. That was very, very covered up. Now they're taking their own, they're claiming their own. And they are gaining success. There are transsexuals on TV, which is exciting. But just yesterday, there was a woman shot in Tyler, Texas for being a transsexual.
And transgender.
Transgendered, I'm sorry, transgender. Right, that's correct, thank you. And so they are paying a price for stepping out. So we still have a long way to go.
David, internally, how accepting is the LGBT community for, you mentioned LGBT plus, to the other groups outside of that? How accepting internally are they?
For me, I haven't got a whole lot of backlash because I'm really good friends with everybody at our center here. So I feel like for me, it's not a big issue. But I have done reading online because I am still fully convinced I'm the only asexual in South Dakota. But, but I've done some reading, and it's like they have a hard time fitting in either community. The straight community doesn't accept them because they're different. The gay community doesn't necessarily accept them because they're different. But for the asexual community in particular, we're starting to be a little bit more pushy, I guess, with the groups to say, you know, we're supportive. We care about the issues just as much as you do. And we are discriminated against by both sides at times. So we need to be protected the same way.
Where do you see all this going 20 years down the road, 30 years down the road?
20 years down the road, it would be so great if this was just a conversation that everybody looked back and said, what the heck was that about? That everybody being treated the same is just the norm. That it doesn't matter if Nancy is married to a woman. People don't ask, well, what does your husband do for a living? They ask, well, what does your significant other do for a living? What does your partner, your spouse, do for a living? They don't automatically assume a person is straight. They don't automatically assume a person is gay.
Do you see that happening?
Not yet, but it's starting. It's not catching on real fast, but it's a slow process. I'm not expecting anything to change overnight because nothing changes overnight. But it's definitely starting to, it hasn't snowballed yet, but it's starting to gain a little momentum.
All right, we'll continue. We'll take an in-depth look at Nancy's particular situation when we come back with this month's edition of Focus. I'm Jack Cottle. Welcome back to this month's edition of Focus, talking about LGBT issues here in South Dakota. And Nancy Rosenbraun is been involved in a very public case recently. Nancy and her wife been together for 28 years. You two went and got married in Minnesota. We became legal in Minnesota, came back to South Dakota, and that's kind of where this whole story goes from there. Kind of a little background on your situation.
Jenny and I have been together for 27 years, okay? And we began to talk about the marriage issue when the Defense of Marriage Act fell last year, over a year ago, which opened up the inheritance issue. We have a business, okay? And if Jenny were to pass with the laws where they're at now, if I inherited it through a will, I would have to pay inheritance tax on it. And that's what the DOMA case was all about. And so we both talked about it and said, we need to start thinking about this. It's kind of rolling in our direction. What do we want to do with it? Neither one of us ever thought that we'd get married. I mean, that just was not in our picture. And so then when President Obama came out and said, if you get married in another state where it's legal, but you live in a state where it's not, the federal protections are going to follow you. And that was the open door we were waiting for. That meant that that inheritance, we got to take advantage of that. And so I looked at her and said, you want to marry me? Let's go. The only thing we don't get to take advantage of is the big one, and that's the Social Security survivor benefits. On the federal level, they believe that needs to be voted on by Congress, which won't happen. Marriage will happen first, before that happens. And so we announced it on January 17th at a rally at Main Street Square that we were getting married. And we went to Minnesota and got it done.
Now, Jenny, what did that mean to you when you were able to go to Minnesota and get this thing done?
Well, it was a big step, you know. Things would change, you know, for us. There's been a lot of publicity, a lot of meetings, a lot, just.
It's been a whirlwind.
Yeah, on and on.
Now, also it changed. You guys came back to South Dakota, wanted to change your names, and then that became a legal issue.
Well, my favorite line is when somebody says, "How do I introduce you?" I said, "Well, do you want our federal name?" Okay, which is Rosenbraun. It's a combination of both of our last names. And it honors and respects our children who carry either last names. And we felt that that was a nice compromise. But in South Dakota, she's still Jenny Rosenkrantz. I'm still Nancy Robrine. We haven't even attempted to change. We did go to the court, the driver's license bureau to ask to change our name. But we stopped there because I don't know if I can remember where I changed it and where I didn't. It is a mess, and it is a landmine. Will your bank accept a federal name, or is your bank operating off of South Dakota laws? We have to go ask every person we deal with, what side of the fence do you live on? And it's like, that's exhausting.
You know,
okay?
The other day, I was going to interrupt just a minute. The other day I was at an insurance company, and I had wrote my name wrong. And, well, either way, but so I said, well, let's just put AKA and then put the other name down. And they accepted that.
Now, Nancy, you have made a conscious decision to be as public as possible about this. You're willing to talk about why. Why do you do this as publicly as you do?
One, we discussed that when we got started. And I said, how do you feel about this? There's going to be a lot of publicity that happens. And what was your response?
I said, okay, if you talk.
Yeah.
And you're willing to do that,
yes,
is my understanding.
And that, opposites always, isn't it? But one of the things she did say is, I guess we'll be out. And I said, well, yeah, obviously we will be out. But the other thing is we're protected. We own our own business. We own our own home. There isn't a punishment that could be delivered to us by stepping out. So those of us who can, we decided we have to, okay? It would be wrong if we didn't go forward, okay? That's kind of like taking the position of let somebody else do it. Jenny and I don't know how to live that way. If we can make a difference, we have to go do that. That's part of being citizens. That's part of helping others. And so if we can be the voice for those who can't step forward, that's what we want to do. So we're not here as Jenny and Nancy. We're here as pushing the envelope for those to be able to enjoy what we can enjoy.
All right, made a lot of progress, and congratulations on the recent wedding. And we'll see where this goes in South Dakota now. We'll have to wait for we see what the courts decide on that. I want to thank everybody for coming up. Curtis Price from Equality South Dakota, Nancy and Jenny Rosenbraun. Also want to thank David Strand from the Black Hills Center for Equality. Had to move him out to get another guest in here for just a little bit. And we want to thank you for joining us for this month's edition of Focus. Hope to see you again right here the first Sunday night of next month. Good night.